free to ask questions if you like, and we'll keep the main body of discussion to the end when I stop the recording, if that's okay. So for this Erasmus Plus project, we are aware that individuals have lots to bring to the series. And so we are aware that you might be curious about this topic. So in the chat there, if anything immediately comes to mind, what you're curious about, what brought you to this short course, please feel free to use the chat there to pop in your thoughts. For today's session, we're going to run through very quickly an overview of the short course series. So an introduction to what we'll be getting up to today and in the next 3 sessions then. We have a fabulous guest speaker for you all, and they're going to share with us their experience using, I suppose, university community partnership methodology. So working with community partners, in particular, working with international protection applicants. And so sharing their experience right off the bat, we felt it was important to get that firsthand experience. And then we're going to throw ourselves straight into techniques for your classroom. And Maria, we were reflecting on this. Your classroom is a very liberal thing. What do we mean about classroom?
So we mean classroom or curriculum when it's meant there. We do really mean, whatever context you bring to your university, whether that's delivering your student facing work or any of the work that you might be doing within the university or within your organization. That's your classroom. And same with your curriculum. That's how you're going to be delivering this out to the people that you serve. And but widely speaking, we are kind of talking about the university context, but really this is open and these techniques can be used across all types of organizations.
Yeah, any environment where you're getting to connect with people, go for it.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So overall, the short course is to explore integrating the topics related to migration and refuge into your curriculum in a meaningful way. So we've emphasized curriculum there as a fluid thing. So maybe it's with staff training that you're doing with your colleagues, maybe it's with students. So, adjusting this to your environment. And I suppose our foundation in relation to this is 3 areas: reciprocity, anti-racism, and community voice and decision-making. So what we mean by these terms is that when we talk about reciprocity, particularly with service learning or community-based learning, it means that you engage with a community group for their benefit as well as for the student benefit. So it's a two-way street, if you like. So for example, you might bring in a guest speaker, maybe someone who is a migrant or a refugee. You might bring them into your classroom to give a guest presentation about their experience. And that's one way in which you might engage your classroom. And what we're doing with this particular short course series is kind of building on that to where we add value back into the community and we ask students or staff to engage out into the community with migrant groups, refugee groups, to build that reciprocity, that two-way street. So bringing something back out to them and enhancing their community and not necessarily extracting from them, but enhancing back into them. So what do they need? What do they require from the university? We'll get into anti-racism today in particular. We're going to unpack that term. Again, you may or may not be familiar with it, but it's really to, I suppose, acknowledge racism and discrimination exists and to frame our interactions with community groups so that we take an anti-racism position, which is an active position, and in acknowledging racism and the first step in acknowledging it, and we'll get into that in detail in this session. And then community voice and decision making is really key. So us as a university going out to migrant communities or refugee communities, again, not appropriate to go out and say, hey, we're going to do this in your community, we're bringing you this, we're going to do that. Instead, a mutual engagement around, well, what would be of value, and really listening and really taking on board community voice and actively setting up opportunities for equality around decision making. Does that make sense? Okay, so with that in mind, to kind of explain, go for it, Maria.
Yeah, this is the course that we're going to be doing. I'm going to fly through this. So we're at week 1. And so week 1 is going to be, we're going to get started with this topic. Then we're going to move on to week 2, where we're going to talk a little bit more about service learning. and then we're going to go to week 3. And the idea is we built it as a pyramid so you can understand that this is really the fundamental where we are now. So I don't know if it's worth going through all the other slides, Lorraine, since you're slide master. Go ahead, you can move them ahead. So but what we're going to do is, so we have this pyramid, but what we're going to explain to you is where we're going to get ultimately, which is ultimately at the top, which is at the apex of that pyramid. And so we want everybody to get active. So we're going to have a hands-on activity. We have GoCom Migrant Radio, and that's going to be an opportunity for us to look at a community university partnership. So that's going to be right at the top. And that's where, so you can imagine if you start feeling that extra slump at lunchtime slump and, oh, can I come to the next course? You want to kind of stay on for the 4 weeks. Okay, Lorraine, go next. But you need to plan properly. So we want to make sure that there's planning before we go into that, that activity and get active. And so we're going to look at the ways to that you can do the design of service learning modules and the assessment of, you know, those kinds of partnership agreements. We're going to look at areas including the University of Sanctuary, which many of you might be aware of. We're going to look at other initiatives like Cell Explorers, which is done at the University of Galway, an initiative that goes out into the community and particularly out to schools. In week 2, we're going to really just interrogate what is service learning. And that's what it's about getting us aware of what that means, what it doesn't mean, so that we can make sure that, just like what Lorraine was saying, that we're aware of what, and I guess being very mindful of how we're going to do this. And then of course there's this week, which is what we're going to be looking at. And we're going to, you know, how we're going to look at that decolonization of higher education and how to, and why we should be doing that. So we're starting with that why question. Great. So the logistics of this course, as you know, is it's 4 Tuesdays like this. I hope that if some of you are out walking, if you want to indicate somehow that you are doing that, or send us an email afterwards so we know that we can try to be as visual as possible. We can give you those visual cues. There is going to be a recording available. We're also going to provide PDFs of the slides so that you can get all the links to any of those resources that you may want. This is Erasmus Plus project, as Lorraine mentioned, and you can see the other partners that are there. And then there'll be a certificate upon completion of this course. So it's just important for you to be aware of that. So I hope you will encourage you to come to all the sessions. Lorraine?
Thanks, Maria. And yeah, the 2 migrant NGOs that are working with us on this project, again, it just to emphasize, you know, that I suppose there is a good partnership methodology to it. So the content actually has been delivered in partnership with NGOs in Italy and Spain as part of this project. Okay, so let's jump straight into the content in terms of what we're talking about. These terms that we've mentioned already, to be fair, we really wanted to give you a basis of what we mean by those terms.
Yeah, sure. So we'll start with international protection. So there's the definition that comes from Geneva. I don't have to read it out, but you can see what international protection's definition actually is. So it says there, it is a protection granted to a person by a third country to guarantee the protection of their basic rights and their physical security when the country of origin has been unable or does not show disposition to protect these rights. So that just gives you a kind of a snapshot of what we mean by international protection. So we're really starting from the bare basis and the foundation here. We're also going to talk a little bit about how migration and refuge are not the same thing. So sometimes you hear these terms. I don't know if anyone was listening to the radio this morning like I was, but there were terms that were being used on the radios and they were kind of being bantied around a little bit. And so, you know, a good thing is we're going to talk about some resources that are out there that will help to unpack some of those terms to make sure that we feel empowered that we can use the right types of terms. But just there, you can see that, you know, migration is much more, it's not a term that's legally binding. It's an umbrella term. You know, people can be migrants and is usually, you know, a form of choice or for particular categories of reasons, like for migrant workers, for example. And then, of course, those like international students who have made it a choice, whereas refuge is much more about a process and has a more legally binding entity. So the main objective is that connection to security and the lack of protection that we talked about in international protection just a moment ago. Great. So I'm not going to go through these. The legal frameworks are there. So this way you have references on what the legal frameworks are. So we're just putting those out there on the slide. And then there are different types of protection. So again, this is about the terminology that's out there that's being used. So Lorraine's going to use her like super PowerPoint as we go through these. So then you have temporary protection there. the idea of subsidiary protection, asylum, which we can unpack in a minute. It's a term that's not used as much anymore, although we hear it a lot. Humanitarian reasons, and there's a little definition there. The idea of resettlement, so the idea of transferring a refugee from one country where they sought protection to another, and then of course stateless status, not considered a national by any state under its laws. So if we just take a few minutes, like, to see that there are these different types of international protection, there is an opportunity to maybe just, think about what this might mean for actual individuals. So we've kind of constructed in this a little form of a kind of a quiz type activity. So to keep you kind of limber in your ways. And also I think it's important for us, as we think about when we hear things in the media about these different kinds of protection, that we understand, what context that people might be coming from. So Lorraine, you want to go to the next slide, I think, before you press any of the buttons. So for example, there's one there, resettlement. So this is an example of a quote from somebody that would be in that context. My family was forced to leave Syria. They went to Lebanon. And then, after 5 years without a work permit, the Irish government welcomed them in. So that's just an example of resettlement. So then we have other ones. So if I read them out, oh yeah, you can see them there. So there's one there for, my country's at war and I fear for my life if I stay. Asylum, there is an example there of what why you would seek asylum. Humanitarian reasons, they're about looking at PTSD and being forced to return my country. Basic rights such as healthcare are not granted. And then moving straight on to temporary protection, which we've seen with a lot of the Ukrainians that have come to Ireland. A stateless status, of course, being born in a country and the nationality is not recognized. So that gives you like a sense on, these are the human stories around this type of international protection that we, and I guess it's just to be mindful that there is those stories that come that, can be connected to that. So Lorraine? Yes, okay.
And then I suppose the National Youth Council of Ireland have several resources that I highly recommend. Again, we'll provide links to these, but they've put together a little map of the process that an individual might undertake practically through the system. And I suppose if your students are going to be working with migrants, refugees, international protection applicants, they might be interested in the technical process that they have to go through in order to, I suppose, navigate a system. So this is just a visual of that. Another great resource that we've come across, people might be familiar with it, developed by the Athena Swan Ireland, is the EDI Literacy Glossary. So a lot of the terms that we've referred to in this session, there's a kind of a meatier definition of these terms available in this resource. And I actually printed and bound several copies of these. So if people want to pop me their postal address, I'll pop one in the post to you so that you have a copy of these terms, which can be very helpful within your environment to be able to pull up the definitions. So having those terms, I suppose what we are going to move towards now is maybe what we are attempting within this short series is to empower all of us to mobilize our students in this area. So we have this scenario. Marcella is a lecturer in biomedical science, and a learning outcome for the course is to understand health promotion opportunities. So Marcella notes that her class is very diverse. She decides that her students could benefit from engagement with local migrant communities and work on a social enterprise project that will focus on physical health. The community partner is La Kayla Gym. This is a real community organization in Galway, set up by migrant women to provide free health and wellness supports to refugees. Before connecting her students into this project, Marcella has decided she needs to provide some classroom discussions and activities. So what kinds of, I've changed her name to Mary, should Marcella introduce in her classroom? And how could Marcella introduce this project to her students? So again, many of you, involved in this might have experience of doing this type of project before, and you might have some ideas around what kind of content would be really helpful for Marcella to include. So again, please feel free to use the chat. And if any of those terms that we used above, I'm kind of conscious that we have political science experts on the call. Hopefully these terms are resonating. So if we were to think about Marcella's classroom, and she's thinking about involving her students, her biomedical science students, let's say they're second year students with Lakayla Gym, what can she do? Well, in the first instance, she might think about, I want to build empathy within my student body for this cohort. So we're very pleased to have with us Eileen. Thank you for joining us, Eileen Kennedy, who is a member of the staff here at the University of Galway, and specifically in our team at the library. And she has coordination responsibilities for Makerspace. And I kind of don't want to reveal too much. You're going to tell us all about your amazing work. And I suppose you have a short story that you can share with us. And Eileen, you can advise us if we can utilize these videos for teaching purposes. Over time.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, Lorraine. Thanks everyone for having me here today. I'm delighted to share a little bit about the project that I worked on with 2 students living in direct provision here in Galway. So I have a little bit of a presentation for you, and I'm going to do my absolute best to go through it quickly because then I want to show you some of the project itself. So the project was called Experiencing Direct Provision Through the Eyes of Students, and it was a virtual reality experience. You can see here on the right one of the stills from the video. So this is a student who's living in direct provision and also studying full-time at University of Galway. So this project was funded by a grant from the Office of the Vice President for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, and created through the Makerspace, which is the area in the library that I manage. We have 3D printers, VR headsets, all that kind of fun technology sort of enabled creative items. The main goal of this documentary was to address misconceptions and tell individual stories of people living in direct provision. I think we have maybe a preconceived notion that it's either wonderful or absolutely terrible, and no one has any sense of what a middle ground might look like, and if there even is a middle ground. And obviously every direct provision center is different, but I want to look at some students and hear about their actual experiences. So these are a couple of quotations from the students that I worked with. One is, they think you have free everything. If someone is paying bills and asked to stay in direct provision, I'm sure the following morning he's going to go back to his bills. The same student said, it's not a place where I would wish to stay. Just for myself, I wouldn't want to be there, but I'm there because of the situation and I'm grateful. And another one said, there are so many people in my situation, you just have to give them a little bit of this opportunity, they will thrive. And what that last student was referring to was the opportunity to study in the university that was enabled through the Access program that we have here in University of Galway. So I knew that I wanted to tell refugee stories with them, not for them, as a part of this project. And I specifically want to do this through virtual reality, because virtual reality in research has been shown to be an empathy machine. We know that with the situation globally, as well as a housing crisis and economic crisis in Ireland, it can worsen the effects that has on minority communities and increase incidents of racism. Virtual reality has a unique way to simulate physical presence and being inside of something. You can't just passively watch it. You can actually look around and engage with the place where you are and the people you are with in that situation. So it can be really, really useful in terms of making the experiences of asylum seekers more tangible, more easy to understand for people and easier for them to relate to. And this all relates to empathy, which can be that treatment or antidote to racism. So the process of co-creating the documentary was a little bit of a whirlwind. The funding was awarded in December of 2022, we're not in the future yet, December of 2022 for purchase of a camera and microphone, and also to pay student staff members who worked at the screenings of the videos. And the screening was scheduled to take place in March 2023. So if anyone's ever made a documentary, that's a really, really tight timeline. So step one was to seek students who actually want to participate in this and being sure that they knew what was involved in it, what was going to look like, and also determining what stories they wanted to tell. So I contacted them through this access office. I had enabled them to study in the university, and 2 of them came back to me. We met twice ahead of the start of the project, just for them to talk about their experiences, get to know me, for us to get to know each other, and to talk about what story they want to tell. And one of them said, we have so many stories. They could have gone at this from so many different angles. So ultimately what we decided to do was talk about the process of them leaving their countries, coming to Ireland, and then studying in the university. So it would be a very kind of fast overview of everything that they'd been through. Each of them was interviewed for 1 hour. Those interviews were then cut down to 10 minutes. I did the editing there. If we had had more time in the process, I would have wanted them to do the editing themselves as well. But then I trained them up on the use of the 360 camera. So all of the footage that you see has been filmed by the students themselves. And then the editing took over 100 hours, mostly just because it was virtual reality video. So if anyone ever wants to edit a VR project, talk to me. I learned a lot in the course of those 100 hours. So the screening took place during Nelson Mandela Anti-Racism Week. And a screening of a virtual reality documentary is very different than a traditional documentary. It's sort of an individual experience, but it ends up being much more intimate with the subjects then. So we had 3 virtual reality headsets. 58 people viewed the documentary over the course of 3 days. And both of the students who co-created the documentary were present at the screenings to then answer questions that anyone might have had after the fact. And both of them watched their own documentaries, and when they took off their headsets, they just had these huge smiles on their face, and they were like, oh, that was amazing. It was such a cool experience. So the outcome, some people actually walked out of the screening with tears. Some had huge smiles on their faces as well. And everyone was just kind of in awe of this experience that these 2 individuals went through. My favorite outcome, I think, is from Ariazel, one of the participants in the project, who said, I think I want to become a content creator. He has had the camera all summer and has been recording videos, and both of the guys want to then apply for the same grant next year to do a similar project on their own. Now, where to watch this video? I'm going to show you a quick clip of it now, but these are the links to where you can access them. For anyone who is in University of Galway, you can also borrow a VR headset from the Makerspace to watch it on as well, but you can also watch it on your phone or a computer. The guys have both asked that the links not be shared publicly because they don't want to impact their application status, or in the case of one of them, he has spoken or he's testified against the situation in his country, so he's concerned about releasing information about where he lives. But I will stick these links in the chat, and Lorraine has them as well, so you can access them after the fact. Now, I've not done a good job keeping track of time, so...
No, you're perfect, Eileen.
Yay,
And just to say
excellent.
to everyone, I clicked on these on my phone, and as you move your phone, it moves around the room that the young person is walking around and through. So watching these on your phone is an experience. So your class might like to each take out their phone during your classroom time and click in.
Yeah, no, I'm just realizing I didn't do the share audio thing, so I'm going to stop sharing and
Yes.
reshare. There we go. Share sound. Oh, I have to install the Zoom audio advice. Oh gosh. Okay, we'll see if it might work anyway.
Or I can bring it up here too.
Yeah, actually, Lorraine, would you do that? I can pop the link in the chat. Sorry, folks.
Perfect.
Great. So if you want to start about 1 minute in, the first minute is just sort of the room, and it's there for the sake of whoever is putting on the headset to get oriented and they can look around a little bit. And then you see this countdown.
My name is Mohamed Saliba, and I'm 27 years old. I'm originally from Guinea, west of Africa. The capital city is Conakry. I left Conakry in 2021. My journey was, I can't describe much of it because I was not aware what I was doing. Everything was just jumping from one point to another, but I was not traveling alone. I was traveling with someone, and then with other few people, like they knew where they are going, and I was just following. When I came to Ireland, they gave me some money and then gave me address where I need to go. But I was so scared, like I don't know what I was doing. Like I was literally sleeping in the street like for 2 weeks. And honestly, I fell sick because I was sleeping outside. It was so cold for me, and I didn't have proper clothing. So they have so many homeless people. They have this shelter. So I was there for like 3 4 days, and then my bag was stolen. So I decided to. I saw the address they gave me. It's written in French. That is the international protection. So I have to locate that. So I have no money with me. My money that I have is gone. So I have nothing. So I went around trying to ask until I found one taxi driver. I remember I said €12. I said I don't have any money. He said, okay, you can walk from this side, this side, this side. And I said, I don't even know where I'm going. Then he said, really? He said, okay, jump inside my car. Then I jumped inside. He dropped me for free. Take me to, he say, that is the place. Go there. So that's how I end up in the international protection. When I first came to Ireland, they took me to travel lodge. They quarantined me for like 2 weeks, 14 days, because it was during pandemic COVID time. And then they took me to a big facility where they place every asylum seeker, and that is the main center. They call it the National Reception Center, and it's Baseski, and it's situated in Finglas in Dublin. It accommodates, if I can say, more than thousands of people. And
Oops. So is that a little bit of a snapshot?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks so much, Lorraine, and excellent navigating.
I know, I was really looking there to scroll through.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions about anything, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And Lorraine, you can feel free to share my email if anybody wants to create a similar project. I would be more than happy to let you know what the process was like.
Brilliant. Thanks, Eileen. And I think the VR, the ability to navigate around really is unique and special. And it's at times maybe invasive. You feel like you're in a person's personal space. So I wonder, Eileen, what the process was around, I suppose, their feelings for allowing, I mean, they were in control of the camera, Eileen, so maybe chat us through that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's kind of funny is when you watch it on a screen like this, it doesn't really capture how close you feel to them when it's in virtual reality with the headset on. You really are face to face with them. And yeah, it did, they I don't know, they oddly were very comfortable with that. I think because both of them were so keen to share their story, and I checked with them at several points along the way. I sent them different drafts of the edit, made sure that they were happy with how it was coming out. And I had them watch it on the VR headset so they could really have a sense of that. And actually the week before, I sent them home with the VR headset and a link to a documentary called Clouds Over Sita, I think it's called, which is a similar VR documentary. So they would get a sense of what we were trying to do. But I think what it came down to was their desire to share their lived experience that made them really comfortable with that.
And you obviously set up parameters that maybe help them feel comfortable. Does anyone else get motion sickness from VR, or is it just me? Get a little bit of motion sickness. And then I suppose the other point, and please, people feel free to come through. Oh, there's a great one there from David.
Good question.
Were they told that they could opt out? Yes. Yeah.
Yes, they were. And I adjusted the University of Galway consent form to add in that they had final say in the project, in what was released, and they can ask for it to be taken down at any point in time.
Yeah. And I suppose you mentioned people's reaction, tears, joy, like, I suppose emotionally hearing a person's story comes with it potentially issues for people, if but likewise people sharing their story, there's a lot that they're unpacking there. I don't know if people want to weigh in on that or have any thoughts on kind of, I suppose, supporting people in that viewing, maybe in those screenings. Eileen, could we direct them to professional services or other references?
Yeah, I would have just said the university professional services, since it was a university project and funded by the university, and the 2 participants are students in the university.
Yeah.
But obviously also they're very vulnerable members of the community. So it was important at every step of the way that they trusted me and knew that I was there to support them through this, and that they were in control of the project at all times.
Yeah. Great. So we're going to thank Eileen, because that's an excellent, I suppose, example or an opportunity for us all, if we want to engage with new communities, to potentially with our students and staff members build that empathy first around their experiences, and utilize what you've developed there, Eileen. So you're happy for people to utilize that in their sessions. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
We'll let you know.
Excellent.
Yeah, do.
Great, and we'll send that. Super. So I suppose other activities for building empathy, there are videos that through this project were highlighted, that were developed by National Geographic and so on, that are available, and we'll send you links. I find personally some of the videos sensationalize the maybe the violence that people experience en route. And I personally would find that quite challenging in my classroom environment to navigate with students, to, I suppose, navigate their feelings of seeing extreme hardship. And so I very carefully navigate that. So it might be something that collectively, or as a group, we look at. How do we support our students to see visuals, videos, content, photographs that are a very intense nature, and weigh up the option. We want them to have empathy and understanding, and then but not sensationalize what's happened to someone. I'm also highlighting here in this graphic an activity that the National Youth Council of Ireland have another resource, the Sustainable Development Goals in Youth, where they have a workbook with activities that you can utilize to explore. So this particular one is kind of to help young people to navigate this understanding around borders. So if we move on from building empathy with our students, we might want to engage our students who will be working with new communities about stereotypes. And bringing up the concept of stereotypes in your classroom, there's lots of different ways you can do it. And there's some great educators on this call. But I'm just going to highlight a few tools that I've used in the past that have worked really well. The train icon is for an icebreaker game. It's a game to bring in the concept of stereotypes quickly with young people. And essentially what it is around the room, I put up a poster with a very singular phrase. So you're going on a train journey, and stand beside the person that you want to sit with on your train journey. So it might be the musician, the dancer, the scientist, the writer. These very singular definitions of who you might want to stand next to. Students go pick where they want to have their train journey, and then we ask them to reveal who their person is. So they flip it over, and that singular story becomes maybe the intersections of the complexity behind an individual. So it turns out the dancer maybe is a traditional folklore dancer in a migrant community. The writer turns out might be someone who's a screenwriter for Bollywood movies. The musician, it turns out, is Indigenous musician in Yellowstone, Canada, right? So remote rural musician. And we talk a little bit about how was that what we were thinking the person would be like? Why did we choose that person to stand beside? maybe the labels that we affiliate to people, and this singular, as opposed to the complexity that we have within individuals. So that's a kind of an easy gateway activity to opening up the conversation and discussion. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the most amazing author, you're probably very familiar with her work. Her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, comes with an educational supplement that you can use in your classroom. Highly recommend it. She talks about growing up and moving from her community to studying in the US in a university, where somebody asked her, did they know how to use the stove? And it's this idea that she was, I suppose, aghast that someone would imagine that everyone from her entire continent only lacked education, lacked resources, lacked, lived in extreme poverty, and that single story of her and her entire people, really she's most famous for saying, if we can abandon the notion that any place or people have a single story, if we abandon that, we regain a kind of paradise. So this idea that there is no single story of a place or people, and I find her talk really powerful with students as a tool for bringing out maybe some of those stereotypes we have about people and place. And she has a great joke at the end where she says, I read that book, American Psycho. Does that mean all Americans murder everybody all the time? So it's just this idea that we have so much more we can pull on when we think of the stereotypes that we have. So 2 other activities I've used with students exploring stereotypes. One is the Radiate campaign, which was started by students in Norway. People might be familiar with this, where essentially this is a group of young people across Africa who are fundraising for radiators for Norway, because it's freezing in Norway and they're so cold and they really need radiators and sunshine, and the people of Africa can do it. They can bring sunshine to Norway. And I suppose the idea is to try to highlight things like the song, do they know it's Christmas? And to really highlight maybe the paternalistic or white saviorism dialogues that kind of, I suppose, frame one entire place as in need, right? So this idea that, of course, Norway is freezing and they need radiators, right? As opposed to understanding it in a more complex way, right? So I will say I have had to be careful about showing this video to students, because I have got the reaction where students have watched the video and said, are people not grateful for fundraising, not grateful for donations? So you really have to buffer this activity with an unpacking of that whole use of celebrity songs, and I use the example, of the boardroom there as another activity, where imagine your classroom, you ask them to be a boardroom, and they're an NGO board, and they have to run a campaign, and it's a fundraiser for Ireland. And we're going to put up a billboard that says save the little old lady in Ireland, and it's got a picture of the little old lady on a trolley in a hospital in Ireland. And how would you feel if you visited that country and you saw a big sign that said, let's save Ireland? Do they know it's Ramadan? Let's do a fundraiser in our boxes at schools for Ramadan, for the people of Ireland. So to try and ask your students to flip that thinking a little bit, and that perspective of what does that single image of Ireland, the little old lady on a trolley in a hospital, actually mean when we have things like a rich language here, a rich culture, music, and so on. So when we just focus on what others lack, we aren't focusing on what they have. So I find these activities helpful.
If I can just to interject really quickly, just if people want to take a look at the chat, there's some really interesting resources that are being shared in the chat too that might be of interest. Yeah, do take a look at that. Get a chance.
So we're coming up to the end of our time here. So what we'd like to kind of close on is just a few more resources in relation to if you're Marcella / Mary in your classroom and you're going to introduce your students to migrant refugee communities, and you want to also maybe bring up the concept of white privilege, there's some great resources. The Privilege Walk is a good one. The resource from the National Youth Council, Walking in Someone Else's Shoes. Again, they give you the actual bios of who you'll be in the Privilege Walk. So you don't have to create these resources are there for you to use. And I still to this day get lots of students not understanding the concept of meritocracy. And I don't know if people have seen this as well with young people that you've worked with, where I will have young people say, well, I worked hard for what I have. Right. And so when we talk to them about actually what we have here is a lovely quote from Ibrahim about how actually what we're saying is it's not that privilege guarantees good outcomes, but a white person, for example, can work very hard and can be mistreated by police without cause and be denied a job. But what it does is load the odds one way or another. And so I'm not going to read all of this, we'll give you this, but it's to feel that empowered, I suppose, in your classroom environment to bring up white privilege and to explore these reflection questions with your students who might be working with these cohorts. So what are their expectations that they might have of migrants? What are their understandings of why a person might seek refuge? Do they think simply, oh, they just came here for a better life? And we've seen that in some of the resources where it's simplified. People have come to Ireland for a better life. So in next week's session, and especially in week 3, we're really going to unpack that, people. Let me tell you something. We are really going to unpack why a person might come here. And I hope from those sessions, you then will feel confident that when you're talking with your students and engaging with them, that you'll feel happy and confident to talk to them about, let's see why a person might have come. What is causing poverty elsewhere that they might then seek refuge or migration? Like, what is causing that poverty elsewhere? And spoiler alert, it's us, okay? We are part of the problem. So we're going to get to that. So reflecting with your students in what way are their understandings a single story about a place or a person, and how are we setting students up to explore why and navigate those experiences. So if our students are coming in contact with migrant and refugee communities and they're expressing to our students that they've experienced racism or discrimination, or maybe our students are feeling it or seeing it, then, you know, how are we equipping our students to deal with that? And I suppose the evidence is there. 1 in 8 people are discriminated on the basis of skin color. In Ireland, it's 1 in 3. And this is according to Research Being Black in the EU 2018 resource. So the evidence is there. And this is a great resource that was developed by Lisa Taylor. She's a Canadian academic. She teaches her students to go and be teachers in primary schools and secondary schools. And she looked around the classroom and she said, you're all European descent. And you're going to now be working in schools that are hugely diverse. And you don't necessarily then look like the people in your classroom, and they don't necessarily look at you and identify with you. So we're going to unpack difficult knowledge or the Canadian history of genocide of Indigenous people. And her students did this research project. It's a lovely resource that you can share with your students, where they identified the ways in which they resist difficult knowledge. So when presented with the idea that people are discriminated against, these students said, well, I don't believe that, or I didn't do it. I wasn't discriminatory towards a person. I wasn't racist. So I use this tool with students as a way to think about how we're being challenged by this material and in what ways do we resist difficult knowledge. So we'll send on these slides, we'll move on from this, but we share with students the difference between an individual analysis of racism, which is acts of bigotry, racist language, to moving on to systems perspective, which is about how rules, regulations, cultural norms and policies, the structural inequalities maintain racism. So if we look at racism as just an individual action, then anti-racism is about behavioral change at an individual level. And if we look at racism as a systemic structural issue, then the anti-racism position is that we need structural changes. And when we look at then what structural changes means, it means about identifying power and the systems that determine who gets what, when, and how. I have a little few slides here on kind of, I suppose, the basis of the term racism. Race is not a biological fact. It is not an ethnicity. It is an invention. It is a term that humans have adapted. It was fabricated or invented. There might be some great historians on the call here who know a little bit about, how this term race was introduced. And I suppose it's in response to what might be happening in the 16th century, where it might be handy to create or invent this notion of race, or this notion of difference, right? That this idea of if one is to colonize and to enslave, then if one is to think badly of one or to exploit them, it's always useful to actually dehumanize them. So we have these actual use of science, this use of biology, that the physical frame of the Irish face indicates that we are less of a human, right? That we are less of a person. And the history of race, some excellent scholars, this idea of equating the Irish race to savages when we resisted essentially being colonized. So the idea here from Imbram is that if we have taught that ignorance and hate lead to racist ideas, lead to racist policies, then our response to that might focus on education and that empathy piece. But actually, if the foundation of racism is not ignorance or hate, but it's actually about economic, political, and cultural control and power, and it's that structural piece. So I'm going to leave you now with this last piece you might want to do with your students. Can I turn on a television, open a newspaper, watch a film, and my race is positively represented? Can I use my new phone in public without wondering if someone thinks I deserve it? Right. So these might be great opportunities and discussion points with your students to navigate safely these concepts. So thank you so much for your attention, and you're a quarter of the way there. Look at you all go. I know there was a lot in that, and some of it might be completely new, some of it might be things that you're familiar with, but we do have 3 more sessions that we can continue to get into this. And thank you so much for engaging in the chat. And I'm going to stick into the chat now a link for our attendance. So if you want to give that a little click, and thank you all so much. And I promise next time we'll actually leave time for chat. Won't we, Maria? I'll turn off the recording now.
That's good. Yeah, no, we'll leave time for chat. I'm just going to put that